of America. That's what we have to. Together we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny, and we're going to achieve the most incredible future.
It's arguably the most nail-biting election in the history of the United States. And now it has finally ended. Trump has emerged victorious over Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. Donald Trump addressing Republican supporters at Palm Beach in Florida. He's promised to, quote-unquote, restore America. Now, over the past weeks, we've discussed in detail about Trump's plans, what they entail when it comes to fixing the U.S. economy to make America great again. But do note, the US is the largest destination for Indian merchandise exports. With the Trump administration, the question is, can higher taxes on Indian exports that Trump has put out as part of his election campaign, one that became this tricky issue in his first stint as president, can it now impact India's economic growth? First, let's listen in to what Trump has said about India being a trade abuser as part of that campaign.
So when India, which is a very big abuser, he happens to be coming to meet me next week, and Modi, he's fantastic. I mean, fantastic man. A lot of these leaders are fantastic. You have to understand one thing. They're 100%. These people are the sharpest people. They're not a little bit backward. They are at the top. You know the expression, they're at the top of their game, and they use it against us. But India is very tough. Brazil is very tough. There are certain countries, I can tell you every one. I can give you from top to bottom. China is the toughest of all.
China is tough when it comes to taxes on American imports. He's talking about Brazil. He's talking about India as well, and being abuser of trade. Now, these are strong words that came out as part of that campaign. And we know how Trump has really focused on making America great again, that plank. Let's discuss the implications of a Trump presidency now and its implications on trade ties between the US and India. And for that, Jayant Dasgupta, the former India ambassador to the WTO, is joining us, along with Agneshwar Sen. He is partner tax and economy policy for international trade at EY India. And we're also joined by Manish Singh, market expert. Gentlemen, warm welcome to India tonight. The presidential battle in the US, very keenly fought. Now we have a clear winner. Mr. Dasgupta, to you first. While many indicate that Trump's victory is a net positive for India, one, because of his friendship with Prime Minister Modi and simply going by his statements during that campaign about strengthening India-US ties. I want to ask you, how much does India have to worry now about higher tariffs, considering what the External Affairs Minister has said on the back of that Trump victory? Just for a moment, just let's listen in to what the External Affairs Minister has said before I come to you.
I think it's also important to look at the US more nationally than just purely in terms of the ideology of the administration of the day. And if one looks at it nationally, there are factors. I mean, it's a kind of a relative power differential. It is a resource issue. There are pressures on resources in the United States. I think when one follows American domestic politics, there are conclusions for all of us to draw. And I absolutely agree with Winston, which is that when we look at the US, we should be analyzing them rather than projecting our preferred outcome or expectation.
Mr. Dasgupta, you heard what the minister has said. There are pressures as far as resources in the US are concerned, he's pointing out. Does it mean that the US doesn't manufacture enough, needs countries like China and India to provide resources? What are the broader implications of what the External Affairs Minister is saying here, according to you?
I think he was making a political statement in the sense that, there are overall, we have to take an assessment of how a particular regime may benefit and or may harm or adversely affect the prospects of another country. And that is why he was asking or exhorting people to be analytical rather than projecting, one's own expectations on a process which he didn't mention as the U.S. electoral outcome. But having said that, I think on the basis of what President Trump did during 2016 to 2020,
Yes.
one, he tagged India, along with, of course, China and the European Union and other countries, Russia, and slapped unilateral tariffs on steel and aluminum of 20% and 10%, which was on the basis of a national security exception under the WTO agreement. And he didn't make a distinction. The second thing was that the generalized system of preferences, which India had been enjoying for about $5.5 billion worth of exports at that point of time, he withdrew it in 2019. So Trump and President Trump has been saying, even in this election campaign, about illegal immigrants. And I think
Yes.
to his mind, there is hardly any difference between an illegal migrant and a regular legal migrant who is taking away US jobs, to his mind.
Yes.
So I think there would be some kind of pushback on H-1B visas also.
Right. So both on trade
which
and
are honored by
yeah.
Indian software companies.
Indeed. And I'll come to that in a moment, Mr. Dasgupta, both as far as trade is concerned, on immigration as well. Where India is concerned, there are strong implications with Trump as president now. Mr. Sen, India is one of the several countries trying to push for bilateral trade in local currencies. India wants to trade in the Indian rupee. Now with the US as one of the biggest trade partners, I want to ask you, does the Trump presidency hamper the kind of benefits that India has already started to reap in with local currency trade with Russia that has happened in recent times?
Actually, as Mr. Dasgupta said, Mr. Trump is one person who not just talks but walks the talk as well. So the days, where you could explain why you were doing and, expect that to be understood may perhaps be ending. There's going to be certainly a more America first approach, to the whole thing. And your explanations, your reasons, if they do not quite meet up to the requirements of what the political imperatives would be of the US government, it's very well likely, that there could be repercussions. There could be, actions which we are not facing now or which we haven't seen for some time. And so coming to your rupee question, yes, that is something which is, the dollar, the prominence of dollar, the preeminence of dollar as the global currency.
Yes.
That is very important for the US.
Correct.
Anything that they see which is going to hurt or harm that in a significant way, I do expect there would be some repercussions certainly on that.
Right. So yes, indeed, as far as the America First approach is concerned, as far as that line, there is certainty when it comes to Mr. Trump. But Mr. Dasgupta, what's your take on this? Rupee payments for Russian imports have helped push India's exports to Russia. Also, India and the UAE have this mechanism for settlement of trades in non-dollar currencies. I'm wondering if now Trump is going to monitor all this like a hawk and impose sanctions to counter this kind of move towards non-dollar trade between countries.
Well, I think President Trump is not certainly going to like the dollar getting, short shrift and countries trading in their own currencies. That is not going to be the US's preferred way of, other countries, trading bilaterally. But having said that, in the BRICS, one of the agenda items, of course, it has been pushed to the background now, But one of the things which was under consideration in a very preliminary manner a long time ago was de-dollarization. And along that, of course, de-dollarization meant that BRICS would come up with some kind of a currency which would be freely traded amongst all the BRICS members. But now I think the focus that is something which is far, far away, and it is not likely to be implemented or acted upon. But what has happened is that India and Russia are trading in rubles and rupees. In fact, the sanctions on 19 Indian companies, which the Americans have imposed recently, last week, that is not going to affect these 19 companies because they are dealing in Indian rupees and Russian rubles.
Exactly.
And they don't have any exports to the US, neither do they have any assets in the US.
Correct.
So even though President Trump may not like it,
Yes.
countries, if they find it convenient, because a lot of trade, for instance, between China and Russia is taking place in their currency.
But the fear of sanctions is still there, and that's something that remains in the unpredictable domain where Trump is concerned.
As far as sanctions are concerned, there are four heads under which the US can impose sanctions against India. One is, of course, CATSA. The second is the Magnitsky, provisions. The third is the Ukraine war, which has been invoked for these sanctions on the 19 companies. And the other one is against, the US national security interests, etc.
Yes.
So that only these four.
Sure.
Now,
sure.
if India and Russia were to continue trading in rupees and rubles,
Yes.
how will that be? I think.
So it may not fall under these four you're saying. So perhaps
that's right.
that may not actually
President
happen.
Trump can do anything, because if
Yes.
past record is anything to go by, he can do anything. But
Right.
it would come in for a lot of criticism
Right.
globally.
Yes.
Because the
indeed.
Europeans also deal in euros
Yes.
when they trade with their partners, not
Correct.
in dollars.
Yes. So over and over again, we are talking about the unpredictability when it comes to Trump. Meanwhile, Manish, analysts are predicting that the US dollar is going to strengthen. Sectors like banks and technology and defense, even fossil fuels, of course, those sectors may benefit. Now, this tax-cutting agenda of Trump, it has been broadly welcomed by the large corporates in the US, not least of which, of course, being Elon Musk. But how do you expect Wall Street to do under Trump 2.0?
So, Vikram, what I would say that, you should look at the outlook of where the equities are and earnings outlook, GDP growth, inflation, equities are going higher. Because one thing you have to see is that, at least in Washington, there seemed to be a bipartisan agreement that deficits don't matter. I mean, that's the point that we are seeing. Yes, you've seen the 10-year yield go to 4.4, but it is still not at an alarming rate that one should worry about. And when it comes down to external debt, yes, US has debt to GDP of 100%. What you really have to worry about is who your creditors are. Most of US debt is held internally. They are the reserve currency of the world. So they can run a higher deficit. So from here on, what you're going to see is more nominal growth. And this is what is going to come out. If President Trump comes up, not only the tax cuts that he put in place in 2017 doesn't expire, but he makes it better, then that is going to drive things again. Of course, you might say that it adds to deficit. What we haven't heard from, of course, we haven't heard because he's not president yet, he's president-elect, is the cost-cutting program that he's going to put in place.
Right.
But one thing we have to be very sure about, cost-cutting alone is not going to drive the debt down.
Right.
The debt is going to be driven down by growth measures. You cannot cut cost and drive your debt down because over 90% of the spending that we are talking in the US
Yes.
are something that they have to do. These are debt repayment, social security, and everything else. So
Right.
what you're really going to see is growth agenda.
Right.
And that will come from deregulation, cost cutting, wasteful spending,
Yes.
and really running the debt even higher probably from
Right.
where it is today, but for the right reason.
But you need
for
to
good.
kind of balance out against the kind of corporate tax cuts that one can anticipate under Trump 2.0. In fact, the kind of pro-corporate leanings that Trump has always had is quite evident in the way that Elon Musk has been through the campaign and now what he's saying. Just listen to what he said too.
The people from North Carolina came to me and they said, would it be possible, at all possible, for you to speak to Elon Musk? We need Starlink. I said, what's Starlink? It's a form of communication. So I called Elon, and I'll tell you what, he had, and it was very dangerous. People would die. They had no communication. All the wires were down. I called Elon Musk. I said, Elon, you have something called Starlink. Is that right? Yes, I do. What the hell is it? He said, it's a communication system that's very good. I said, Elon, they need it really, really badly in North Carolina. Can you get it? He had that there so fast. It was incredible. So, and it was great. It saved a lot of lives. He saved a lot of lives. But he's a character. He's a special guy. He's a super genius. We have to protect our geniuses. We don't have that many of them.
Protecting geniuses like Elon Musk. Trump is talking about him, and look at the way Tesla shares are jumping 14% at open. And this is the story that's unfolding. Trump media has climbed 35%. Amazon hitting an intraday record high. Blackstone is up, and we're looking at stocks like Nvidia, Micron, Broadcom, Qualcomm, Intel. All of these are rising. Global Foundry is up 7.4%. So we're seeing that kind of rise in the markets, Manish. Also, we're anticipating that Trump could benefit corporate earnings going ahead, and that's perhaps why we're seeing all the stock prices move up. Now, the entire outflows from India, as far as FIIs go, a lot of it has gone into the US, back perhaps. Is the reason for this now seeming clearer as we watch the markets rise and the dollar get stronger? Is that going to be sustained?
Because if you have US growing at over 2% or 3%, I think that's a good news for global economy, not just for the US, because so I think that should be celebrated the way things are. And US will do what is good for the US, and India should do what is good for India. And I think that that is what is going to come out. So when President Trump talks about America first, I mean, India should talk about India first. And that is what a national political leader ought to do. But the key thing is that what you're seeing now, President Trump has got a mandate. He has the Senate. So appointments are going to go through without any problem. He might get the House. So you're going to see a mandate. If that leads to 2.5%, 3% growth, you could really see a very booming global economy. And that should really be a good news for everyone, as far as I see, because there are lots of things that US is not going to manufacture. So there will be rhetoric. There will be rhetoric about tariff. There will be rhetoric about what US wants to do. In terms of national security, yes, some of the manufacturing will happen in the US, but there's lots that they can't do, and that is going to come to India if it is not going to China. So I think it should be good news for global economy.
I think this is a plus for the global economy. Do you stand by what Manish is saying? Because on the flip side, there is the potential trade tariffs increasing inflationary pressures in the American economy, possibly leading the Federal Reserve to maintain higher interest rates. Perhaps it's going to help financial stocks a whole lot. But what about the other sectors? How do you see that playing out?
Is it for me, Vikram?
Mr. Sen.
Well, my expectation certainly is that there is going to be a lot of pressure on India. As you know, he has clubbed India and China together as tariff champions, and one of the things that he has said is he's going to increase the tariff significantly. Now, the increase in tariffs, as it has been explained repeatedly, of course, has two impacts. One is domestic inflationary pressure, which is going to go up. The consumer prices are going to go up, but at the same time, it could create jobs, and that is another, objective of the Trump economy as we expect it to be. And that is going to make it difficult. But the only issue that I see is different from, India's situation vis-a-vis China is that, a lot of what we export to the US, well, that even, under a high tariff, it will not really shift the business itself to the US, unlike what is likely to happen vis-a-vis China. So that might create actually opportunities for India, in looking at the supply chains, where you are in the supply chains, or how the new supply chains are created, when you're looking at this onshoring, which might happen in the US following these tariff changes.
Indeed. Mr. Dasgupta, some believe that Donald Trump is going to dial back some of those antitrust policies that were pursued by the Biden administration, which potentially includes that attempt to break up Alphabet's Google over their dominance in online searches. Will Trump go after big tech companies, you think? Now that we are seeing him become so pro-business, he has always been, but considering the entire campaign so far and what he brings to the table in his second stint, this America First stance, is he likely to go as much after these businesses that are potentially very big for America?
Well, I don't think he's going to go against American businesses which are creating jobs in the US and which are contributing to the GDP of the US. To that extent, I think he will refrain from taking action, including antitrust action or pushing such action. As far as it reminds me of an auto company which was trying to take its, or build a new plant outside the US some time ago. And President Trump, in one of his election speeches, mentioned that he would take action against that company. It is one of the auto majors of the US. He would take action against that company for taking jobs away from the US. So he is very clear in his mind that he wants to encourage companies to grow bigger, to have more profits, to contribute to the economy, and in a very positive manner also contribute to the jobs, because that is one of the things I think in this election. There are two things which seem to have caused some damage to the Democrats. One is the inflation, which the administration couldn't control in the past 4 years. And the second thing was the job market was more or less, I don't say that unemployment was high, it was not. But the real wages, if you look at the real wages of people, especially the lower income people, that didn't rise and it was getting eroded.
Right.
That was one of the reasons why I think certain sections
so there has been a mismatch.
Democrats voted for the Republicans.
Mr. Dasgupta, there has been that mismatch, isn't it? As far as the Biden administration is concerned, the economy looked very strong, but at the ground level, people were complaining about not having enough to spend.
Yeah. The cost of living in, I think, as was the case in the UK, which led to this landslide victory of the Labour Party. And it is something similar which we have seen here as well in the US. So that has been one, I think experts are saying that was one of the factors responsible for this.
Certainly.
It is a kind of a landslide victory here as well in the US.
So even as we assess America's domestic economy, as far as we were talking about the impact on the IT sector, Mr. Sen, how much do you expect immigration laws to tighten in Trump 2.0? While many Indian IT companies, they've reduced their dependence on H-1B visas. But how do you see it potentially affecting India's IT sector now going ahead under Trump?
Again, this is something which Mr. Dasgupta had initially touched, the clarity between legal migrants to the US and illegal migration, which certainly is one of the key points, why he is going to become the next president. Now, that being the case, how much they tighten the legal migration itself, that is going to be very important. One will have to wait and see, if there's a clarity, if they come ahead with a policy which is very clearly, say, business friendly, and they see these migrants coming in to produce in the US, I expect the impact would be far lesser. However, one will have to see whether that clarity actually dawns, that you do need migration for the US economy to grow. You cannot very well have growth in the US economy without migration. And that's particularly so for the IT sector. With the coming of AI in a big way, the next 4 years are going to be extremely fascinating for this sector, I'm sure. All of us agree.
Yes, certainly. But even beyond the IT sector, Mr. Dasgupta, from the kind of push that we can expect from Trump on higher tariffs on Chinese goods, there is the question of the kind of opportunities that we see appearing for Indian sectors. Which ones in particular? Perhaps textiles, auto components, consumer electronics. So is this spread of the supply chain really likely to benefit India, the whole China plus one thrust, even as we look at competition for India on that front from countries like Vietnam and Thailand and Mexico?
Has been saying that he will raise the tariffs for all countries.
Yes.
And especially for India, he's saying that there will be this reciprocal tariff, that if India imposes a tariff of X on a particular product, the US will do the same for Indian exports to the US for that product. So that is, I don't know whether that is part of the rhetoric or he will actually get it translated into reality. That is one thing. The second thing is, he's been saying that we have overall been having very low tariffs, and the US average tariffs are about 4%, including everything. There are certain peaks, for instance, in textiles, in ceramics, in leather, etc. But by and large, the tariffs are low. Now, if President Trump were to carry out his pronouncements or his threats, if I may say so, that he will have at least 10% tariffs on everything, if not 20%. And for China, it will be 60%.
Right.
Now, if that is so, that for the rest of the world, it is, let's say, 10%, and for China, it is 60%. So then, whether it is Vietnam or Thailand or Mexico in any case, because of the Mexico-Canada-America agreement, most of the goods are zero tariff and have zero tariff entry into the U.S. But barring the FTA countries, the CAFTA countries, Central American Free Trade Area, and Canada, Mexico. Barring them, if the tariffs are raised for all countries and China gets, a very high tariff of 60%, then I think it will be more or less a level playing field amongst the non-China countries.
Right.
So then Indian exports will not suffer.
Right. But on
The
that...
problem is if the US, for instance, lets off Vietnam,
right,
or the Thais or the Malaysians,
right,
and if there is circumvention, for instance, there was some analysis I came across which showed that Chinese exports to the US have come down by about 5%, and the exports of a neighboring country have gone up by the same percentage in volume terms.
Right.
So it shows that there is circumvention which is taking place. Now,
right,
if President Trump in this term
yes,
clamps down heavily on that kind of flouting of the rules,
right,
then it will be effective.
So that's what I mean. There are these various pockets of uncertainties. In fact, I go back to a conversation that we had with noted economist Swaminathan Iyer here on ET Now. He told us that Mr. Trump started off from the position of saying that he's going to impose a 10% flat duty on everybody. Then he said 20%. On China, first he said 60% tariffs. Then he said 100%. So Mr. Iyer's point is that Trump says all kinds of scary things. He said that himself. And then within 48 hours, he says something even scarier. And then he contradicts himself. So Mr. Dasgupta, it does make, this entire question mark become that much stronger when it comes to India's potential trade relations going ahead. Is it difficult to gauge at this point in time which way this will go, whether it's going to remain the same, it's going to go up or down, because such a significant trade partner for India?
I think what I can see is that President Trump is not going to treat India favorably, as compared to, let's say, the Europeans or the Brits or anybody else. China will have to bear the brunt of, some rough treatment. But India, along with many other countries, will be treated with the same broad brush approach. And on defense, of course, the kind of cooperation which he started during his first stint, that is likely to continue. So that trade will keep going up, I think.
Right.
But barring that, there would be the same kind of treatment that India will get,
Right.
as would the rest of the world other than China.
Fair enough. And in passing, as we see what's happening on Wall Street, Manish, one wonders about the sectors that may face challenges because of these stricter trade policies like technology, retail, manufacturing, where costs could potentially increase. How are they likely to do now, these particular sectors, if you consider what could possibly happen in the next 6 months to a year?
We're talking about the US equities or
The
Indian
US equities, indeed. Now that stricter
Yeah.
policies may come in, all the costs now would rise if you're going to impose higher tariffs, right?
Yes. So first, I would say that I don't believe that you're going to see very high tariffs.
Right.
I think there is a difference between what President Trump says and what he does, and he also has a team around him. And if you see the team around him, his likely Treasury Secretary is going to be John Paulson, from what we hear from his appearances. He has been his electoral surrogate. While they favor tariff, but nobody favors 60% or 80% tariff. So I don't think that's going to happen, because he has won this election on the back of seeing the price level high, and that has brought down the Democratic government. If it was not for the high price level, I don't think he would have won this election so easily. So that he will bear in mind, that you don't want to do that. And second, I would say that he would want to go down in history as one of the greatest presidents, and he is looking for his legacy. So I don't think he does that. If he does that, if he makes that mistake and does that, he will unwind it very quickly, because you will see the inflation rise. You will see central bank stop cutting rate and raising rate. So as a market person, in my view, that's not playing out. I think there's a big difference between rhetoric and what he's going to do. He's not going to enact any of these policies until Jan the 20th. So we have plenty of time to see what's going to happen. So I feel very reassured on that front. What I'm really looking for is, what does he do about growth? I'm not concerned about debt and deficit, because nobody's looking at
Sure.
it from this point of view, given where the US sits. So
Right.
it's the growth policies that really excites me,
Yes.
and what he's going to do about taxation.
Yes.
And finally, I would say I'm a believer that disinflation is going to be the big problem in the medium term. Fed is going to cut rates. When the corporate refinancing wall is hit, and that's going to happen in Q4 2025.
Yes.
That's when you will see rates coming down massively.
Right.
And that is going to help the economy. So if I take a 12-month view, 18-month view, I'm absolutely not concerned about the equity.
That's going to be the big piece for the markets now, what the Fed is likely to do now that we have Trump in the Oval Office. What exactly is the Fed going to do? Will it continue with their rate cuts? Are they going to keep them higher for longer? That is still in play. And of course, there are several moving pieces. Jayant Dasgupta, Mr. Agneshwar Sen, and Manish Singh. Thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on Trump as president and what it means for bilateral trade between India and the US. We'll take a very quick break. On the other side, of course, we will be discussing the impact of a Trump presidency on geopolitics and, of course, what domestic policies have really led to Trump becoming president. We'll break that down as well here on India Tonight. Do stay with us.